get back onto the property market now, our favourite thing. And, Sydney is getting nicer, apparently. It's moved up the tracks. This is the world's most livable cities. Melbourne used to be, as you see, number one for all those years, and Vienna took it over a couple of years ago and has held on to top spot. Now, again, as I said last year, and, it's the value of the advertising. Have any of you seen headlines about how Melbourne is the second most livable place to live in the world? No, because who cares about second? Who came second at the Grand Prix in Singapore? Anyone know? I don't know. Doesn't matter. And that's the problem. Melbourne got all the press when it was first, doesn't get much when it's second, but it's still there. But Sydney's now in third, which is a fairly big uplift. It was 11th for a while. So it's done something right. I don't know what they did there, but they tied it up and it's back at number 3. And Perth, this is where the credibility of this has to be questioned. You can't have Perth at 14. It should be at number 1. But I have to report it to you officially, and that's what it is. But you can see there's, in the top 14 places, you have 4 of Australia's cities. And let's face it, we only have 4 real cities. So that's not bad. All those other countries, they've got lots of cities. They only got 1 or 2 of them in there. That means nothing. So that's the way it goes. But I've been to most of those places now. Australia's still the best. I went to Copenhagen. Yeah, it's all right. It's nice, but I'm not going back. Vienna's gorgeous if you've got lots of money, live in the centre, in the centre of the city. Apart from that, it's not that flash. But Australia, I keep reminding people, it's gorgeous in depth. You've got a really great city and you keep driving and it's still great. There's only pockets of not so great, but even our not so great is better than everybody else's good some places. That's why we keep being the most livable. And here is again, as I always remind you, the secret to Australia's success, our population growth. And this is ironic, we're still running and now at a record high in the last probably 8-9 years at 404,000 people last year, despite the fact that you might remember the government cut the migration quota in Australia because they're worried about overpopulating the country. It's so small down there. There's no room, apparently. We've got 25 million people now in Australia on the same landmass of America that has 300 million. And I don't even know how many's in Russia, but it's a fair few. I met a few of them. But the reason why it's still going up, even though the quotas have gone down, is people always forget it's a 5-year arrival visa. So if you got your visa a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, you don't have to turn up for up to 5 years. So that change in visa numbers won't really impact things for about 4 to 5 years. That's just the way it is. Because in New South Wales, it's still trending upwards. And that's why it's just had the shortest bad property cycle in Australia's history, literally 12 months. Unbelievably fast from miserable to it's okay now. Victoria, oh my God, it's collapsing. It's collapsing. It's 3 years now that it's been going downwards from 145 to 143 to 139. Oh, it's diabolical. But it's still the biggest quantum in Australia, 140,000 people. So what that means is if we had a meeting of everybody that arrived in Melbourne last year, we couldn't even put it at the MCG. The MCG only takes 100,000 people. So we said, hey, welcome party. The MCG's not big enough. Crazy. The problem in Melbourne is they're not building enough stuff for these people of the right stock. But Queensland really starting to get moving again. You can see those population numbers are good. They bottomed out at 59. They're up 70, 81, 89, 90. Trending now. And WA, which has been smashed in its property market because of its poor population growth, finally trending in the right direction. So at last we can see good stuff coming. But you see, all capital cities, strong population growth. Strong, 1.6 across Australia. And I'll remind you, as I do almost every year, this shows how economically useless Australia is. The reason I say that is every year we have about 1.6% more customers come into our store. 400,000 of them, sitting down in the back row, cup of coffee, love? Yes, please. 1.6% more customers, yet our revenue only goes up 0.3, 0.4%. So retail trade last year in Australia went up 0.3. 1.6% more customers, 0.3% more sales, most people would be sacked. Get a new marketing manager, get a new operational manager. Nope, but in Australia, it glosses over all cracks. Everything's fine, and this is why we've had, as Greg said earlier, 26 years of consistent economic growth. Because these people come educated and cashed up. It's too far to swim to Australia. And that's why we keep the sharks, just in case. First line of defence. But this is the greatness of Australia. We have this, plus we have exports, and we have animals, and we have all sorts of strange things that you Singaporeans may never have seen unless you went on holiday to Australia. But this is our secret here. This is what keeps our cycles real and moving. And as you can see, everything's going pretty much according to plan. I'm leaving Sydney just in the slow growth phase, but just. It's out of there in no time, and it's already, you're seeing clearance rates rise, etc. But it's in mainly the residential stock because there's 120,000 plus people looking for a home. In Melbourne, 140,000 people looking for a home, but they keep building small junk. These people don't want to live in small junk. They want to live in a house. They've migrated. Build them a house. We'll be right. But if you have a look again at the housing growth, on the credit, it fell off the cliff in recent time because of tougher borrowing conditions and then more recently, fear of what the Labor government under Shorten might do. But it's starting to recover. Things are starting to get moving. But one of the things that is quite interesting to me is I've talked all the time about the importance of supply and demand. The reason why Australia is safe is our demand is constant. Those 400,000 people a year arriving is new demand. We need new housing if there's new demand. It's not just people rotating. But you can see now, for the first time in quite a while, the trend of new approvals is on the decline. So supply, which normally is needed to match demand, supply has been getting quite strong and keeping it in relative balance, but not in the old stock in Sydney. But now the supply is also soft. So we've got consistent demand, we've got softer supply. Guess what? Housing prices will rise. Now the joke here and the big irony is that if you remember, as recently as about 6 to 12 months ago, everyone in Australia was whinging that low interest rates were driving property prices up. It was the talk of the town. Terrible, they're ruining the market, low interest rates, is letting everyone pay too much. The irony is, they've just dropped interest rates, and now they're saying they had to do that to support the housing market. Well, what is it, people? Is it one or the other? I don't know. But supply is the only way you can keep a market in relative equilibrium, and that's in decline. And housing credit, we strangled the banks. And you know what they did? They said, you know what, we're making so much money whether we lend or not to any new customers, we'll just stop doing it for a while and see how that goes. Now they're slowly saying, oh, look, we are a bank after all. I suppose if you're here, we might as well give you a loan. Who would have thought? But that's the thing from an investor point of view. When that supply is stagnating or falling and the demand is on the rise, believe you me, that's opportunity. If we have a look at the June figures, interestingly enough, in March 19 this year, for the first time, I think, since the global financial crisis in 2007, every place in Australia was in negative growth. That hasn't happened for 12 years. That's called the Shorten cyclone. That's how afraid all of Australia was if they got in. And why they said, no thanks. Don't take my word for it. Go check the polls. Last time I checked, Morrison's in at the lodge. Okay? But that was an apparition. It was a fear rather than a reality. It's a perception change rather than living in what's known. But you can see things will quickly start to pick up and recover, because now all of a sudden people say, oh, look, it's okay, it's not too bad, interest rates are low. The prices in Sydney are still horrendously high. They fell, 9%. But did you see what they were before that? Frightening. So even with a 9% reduction in Sydney, it's still frightening. There is no one who is buying a property in Sydney today after a 9% fall that would walk into my office and say, Steve, I can't believe my luck. Look how much I paid for this property. It's so cheap. Because it's not. But that's the price, because it's one of the top 3 world cities. You got record low interest rates and you got record high migration of dudes with lots of money. So if you don't buy it, they will. And that's why those prices are there. And that's why Sydney will recover. You can see its reduction was reduced to 0.5 in the following quarter. That's why it's going to be a very, very quick turnaround, less than 2 years, moving from end of cycle to new cycle of growth. That's pretty good. Melbourne should not have come off, technically. But the significant fear of Sydney was overpowering. And the main reason for that is the news centres are heavily out of Sydney. So all the press you had in the whole of Australia for the last 12 months was, oh my gosh, the property market is terrible. But it wasn't. The Sydney property market was terrible. But they didn't say Sydney property market, they just said property. So everyone said, oh, I didn't know, but it must be bad here in Melbourne. Let's not do anything. Just like when Sydney was flying, they would be going, hey, the Australian property market's doing amazing. And I was sitting in Perth going, what are you talking about? I'm losing money, mate. Queenslanders couldn't figure it out. They looked outside and it was still raining. But that's just what happens. So Melbourne got spooked, but 130-odd thousand people, 1 1/3 MCGs arriving every year, and they're going for it. So expect that to be a short and quick turnaround, and opportunity abound all over Australia. Low rates, low supply, more importantly, high migration still coming in. It's a perfect storm. Take advantage. Now you see Sydney had to come back. It came back 10% officially year on year, but it still did 5% over the 5. You know, Melbourne came back 7, as I say, unnecessarily. Brisbane was one of the top performers with just 0.4. Perth, for some reason, slid 5%. I cannot understand that. We've been doing pretty well, so I don't know. But statistically they are. I think it's because of very, very small turnover. But more importantly for me, the long-term averages are still good. And then this is the stat that I've been putting up for a little while. You can see in 17, blatantly, and this is why I've been predicting Sydney to cool for a while, it was 55% above the national average. It had to slow down because it was getting way over whack. It's now 43% above the national average. Now that's more acceptable, but probably still a bit high. Now I don't think that it's going to grow more than the average. I think the average is going to kick back up quite quickly. I think all of the states are going to enjoy a period of growth, which is going to lift the average, but the average in Sydney as a percentage will probably come towards the 40, 37, 38 mark, because the lower base will rise and everybody will benefit. So I think there's opportunity in everywhere in Australia. You just have to make sure you pick a nice, livable property. That's the secret. Nothing crazy, just a nice, livable property. The Australian average, 6% down last year, 3% up for the last 5. One of the reasons that I keep reminding you that it's stable in our market is the vacancy factor. And you can see Sydney's vacancy has actually gone up. It was 2.5% this time last year. It's increased its vacancy to 3.3. So it's 0.8% worse. The main reason for that is supply coming into the market. So it's created a bit of a fix, but there's still mass demand from the new migration. And you can see in the last quarter, that vacancy contracted by 0.3%. So you can see there's more tenants than there is properties, which again, as an investor, is what you're looking for. You see, Melbourne's roughly in balance because there is a lot of supply, a lot of high-rise they built there. But the problem is that high-rise is generally not livable. So the people that come in say, I'm looking for a nice place to live. They go, well, there's this little place. What else? Oh, no, that's it, mate. Oh, well, I'll go there for a few months while I find something nice. And they get stuck there for a while unless they release the checkbook. You have to. Brisbane, 2.4 is very good, sitting there nice in stock, and they'll get a lot of inflow of people selling in Sydney, selling in Melbourne and heading up, retiring. And Perth, this is one of the reasons I'm very bullish on Perth. Its vacancy has come off 2% in the last 12 months and 4% in the last 2 years. So all those people were leaving. Population growth went to hardly anything in WA. But you can see it's now recalibrating. The population growth is getting back to normal. And that tightening of vacancy is the first signal in any property market that opportunity is soon to follow. So I'm very, very bullish there. Very comfortable in Sydney. Very comfortable in Melbourne. Very comfortable anywhere in Australia, provided you buy a nice, livable property. Doesn't matter if it's an apartment, a townhouse, a house, a villa, a mansion, a shoebox, I don't care. But it has to be livable. So you'd have to be a very, very small person to buy a shoebox. And all I know in humanity, I don't know if you've ever toured around, particularly Europe and all those other places, when they say, hey, look, come through the old cottage. And I'm not even that tall, but I'm smacking my head. And then I go down to the corner and I'm looking at all the kids there that have got parents that are 5'10" and 5'11", and the kid's 6'7". So I don't know about you, I'm not sure I would be buying small properties for the next generation. Just as a point of note there. But all over Australia looking pretty good. And you see, we're seeing rental growth virtually everywhere except for Darwin, which is no surprise because it was a bit of an artificial market. Never been a fan of there. But you can see that lets you know stability, sensibility, and good growth. Finish.